Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with two very special guests. Our first guest today is Jeanne Auvinen, and she's here to share with us her new book, Rough Beauty, 40 Seasons of Mountain Living. Now, Jeanne earned an MA in poetry from the University of Colorado and a PhD in fiction from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and presently teaches writing workshops at Lighthouse North and film, pop culture, and storytelling to freshmen at CU Boulder. So let's welcome to the show, Jeanne Auvinen.
Thank you so much.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your memoir. I mean, my goodness, once I picked this book up, I could not put it down.
I always love to hear that from a reader. But I think it is, I think what makes the story compelling is that it's this idea of a woman alone in wilderness. And I think that's a story we need to be telling more, in our culture.
Well, and why so? Why do you think that's important?
Well, the first reason it's important is because one of the reasons I wrote this book is because, when I said I lived at, 8,500 feet on top of a mountain by myself in a wood-heated, stove-heated cabin with my dog, people looked at me and said, "Why are you doing that? Aren't you alone? Lonely? Aren't you afraid?" And the truth of the matter is, first of all, this is a question that no one asks a man. So I thought, well, I'm going to write a book about that. People want to know what my life is like out there. And so we're still not used to seeing women, even though there's so many of us who spend time alone in the wilderness. It goes against our kind of gender stereotyping in society. And so that's the first part of it. But the second part, I think, is really that I think that women in particular are hungry for role models, are hungry for stories about women who do go it alone, who live an independent lifestyle, who have a sense of their agency. And I think our culture needs more of those stories. I mean, I grew up hungry for someone who was an adventurer who looked like me. And the closest thing I found, and it was spectacular and inspiring, in my 20s, I read Anne LaBastille's Woodswoman. And of course, she's in the Adirondacks, and she's canoeing across a lake, and she's floating her own wood across the lake and building her own cabin, which I thought was amazing. And, my life, by contrast, was like living in a hotel, honestly. But I was inspired by that. I wanted to know about strong women who did things that I only kind of dreamed of doing.
Well, why don't you share with us a little bit about your childhood and growing up, and kind of what led you to want to be in the wilderness by yourself and have that adventure?
I grew up very much feeling like I was an alien in my family. I had a very strong Italian father, we had very much a patriarchal family where it was really clear from the get-go that the lives of men were important. And the lives of women, our role was to be a supporting character. And this is I grew up in the, 70s, I graduated in the 80s. And, this is really not that long ago, where I was told that I would just make somebody a good wife someday. And so that message didn't sit very well with my sense of who I was. I wanted to have an adventure. I wanted to live a big life. And so I rebelled against that. But then also my family was it was very violent. My upbringing was violent. My childhood was, I would say, unhappy, deeply unhappy. And so I just felt like I didn't fit with them. There's a story I tell in the book where it's this kind of sense of like, who are these people? And they actually looked at me the same way, like, what is this person who's in our family who has an opinion, who wants to do things her way, and doesn't want to kind of follow the family line. So I tell this story in the book about when I was about 10, I would get this ringing in my ears, and I thought it was, I would be sitting outside and I thought it was my alien family, like I had come from outer space somewhere. I was making stories up even then. And we had come to Earth to explore, and I somehow had gotten lost or, wandered away, and they had to go back, and the ringing was them trying to tell me how to get home again. So I always felt like I didn't belong, and it started in my family. And then it felt, kind of as I grew up and went to college, I got some of those same messages that women get about the fact that, maybe this isn't for you, or you're treated differently because of who you are as a woman. The employers think you're going to get married and have a family, so they don't want to hire you. I mean, this stuff is still happening. We see it in the news, how women are treated. And so I kept thinking, well, family's not good and society is not very comfortable. And so I just kept moving away from society. So I have a very strong no factor in my life. That's not working. I'm going the other way. And so I kind of walked off the map. And the woods were the one place that felt okay for me. Interestingly enough, I felt safe there. I mean, I say in the book, I'll take, kind of the overblown perils of bear and mountain lion any day over, my fellow human beings. And that says something, that we, living in the mountains, I'm not afraid that something's going to break in and get me. It was living in the city, I was afraid that someone was going to break in and get me. Interestingly enough, even though my dad was quite violent and domineering, he's the one that taught me to love the woods. Camping trips were our vacation. And so I loved the forest. And so I kind of just gravitated slowly but surely away until I ended up on top of a mountain.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that story because it's interesting. I think a lot of women have been told that story. It's like, oh, you're going to make a good wife. And it, I was told that growing up and I thought, the heck, that's going to happen,
Right. Right. You're going to be really good servant someday. That's what it sounds like, You're going to be really, that's what I want. I want to prop somebody else for the rest of my life. So yes, it's frustrating. And I teach first years, and I still have women come to me and say, my parents want me to find a good doctor to marry. What year is it? I mean, seriously. So those messages are deeply embedded in our culture.
Yeah. And you're so right about that because there has been, at least with me growing up, I can remember women were so devalued, and having a boy or, a son or something like that was like, that was the ultimate goal,
It's interesting. And, I think this is probably where a lot of that alienation came for me because I knew myself to be strong. I knew myself to be competent. And I was, in my family, it was, my dad telling me what to do, or I was supposed to defer to both my brothers. And I talk about this in the book when my mom gets sick. We had kind of wrestling matches over over how to care for her. And I was thinking, just get out of the way. I know how to handle this. And the message always was, but you're somehow, because of my biology, I was incapable of doing that. And so I wanted to find a way to express the strength that I felt and to affirm to myself, I'm right. I am strong. I can take care of myself. And I think, nothing better than pitching yourself on top of a mountain in a, kind of a cabin that needs to be heated. You have to build a fire every day. You have to haul wood. You have to dig out after snowstorms. You have to keep the critters out in the summertime. No better way than kind of picking that kind of existence. And it made me feel, good about myself. But I'm the kind of person who always tries to pick the hardest thing. I'm trying actually now in the second half of my life not to do that so much. Because it's exhausting and because I'm done having to prove myself to me or to anyone else. But it was great to come from a place where people were telling me, no, you can't, to going to a place where I said, yes, I can.
Yeah. And kind of blaze your own trail there.
Right.
And I applaud you. I know you and your dog Elvis were hanging out on the mountaintops for quite some time.
Yeah, he was really, honestly, he was the love of my life. So I've kind of alluded to this terrible childhood, which was violent. I got hit and there was a lot of kind of boundary invasion and emotional abuse. And I really didn't grow up trusting anyone or knowing really what it meant to be loved unconditionally. And the shock of that is that I didn't really understand that wasn't the way it was supposed to be until I got older. And then there was so much grief about, oh my God, really? Not everybody has a family life like this. And so I, kind of adopted this dog from the pound. He was when I adopted him, he was 58 pounds. He, grew into his 72 pound. He was 72 pounds for the rest of his life. Finally, after a couple years of trying to figure out what he would eat, they found him running down the road with a spiked collar on his neck, and he was a character. He was kind of like a human in a fur coat, and I think people who have had a dog where the dog is your primary relationship understand like what I'm talking about when I say I could look at that dog and know what he was thinking, and he knew what I was thinking. I would be driving down the road, I get angry at, getting cut off by a driver. And before I even said, something bad, the dog was licking me on the cheek. It's okay. Don't get mad. So we had a really special bond, but that what happened, and it was what was really interesting about that is, so he was a runner. Huskies love to run. They love to run away. They don't want to listen because what they're chasing is so much more interesting than what you want them to do. And so we had this, I took him to obedience classes. They were a bust. And the thing that finally worked is that I tied him to my waist via a cord, a leash, in the morning. And when I got up, he got up. And when I walked, he walked. And when I sat down, he sat down. And actually what it did was, it didn't break its spirit, as it and what it did was it made him realize that he was supposed to be with me. And so that if he did run off, he was going to come back. So he circled around. So there was this cord that I used to train him, and he would never come when I called him, but I finally trained him to wait, and he would stop. But that cord also worked on me. It was like it was an invisible cord to me, to my heart, really. And Elvis really kind of inserted himself between, I say in the book, between my breastplate and my skin. And I experienced so much tenderness with that dog and really understood what it was like to love unconditionally for the first time. And I think he really paved the way for, honestly, for the rest of my life. I mean, like, loving him was a transformational experience. And all the way up until, the day he died and through his death, it was pretty magical.
What were some of the challenges you experienced being on the mountain?
I think, of course, winter is hardest, right? Because you're up there alone. You don't go out much. It's me and the roar of the wood fire, and really the sound of my own voice kind of startled me at times because I'm not talking to anybody. Mm-hmm. But I think those challenges actually really, I hate to sound like a self-help guru, but those challenges really turned into opportunities. So, one of the things I did when I moved up there was I kind of was running away from everything, society and people, and I just wanted to be left alone. The cabin I had been living in, that I moved into, the first cabin that I moved into to kind of like start my life as a writer at 39 after I finished my PhD, burned to the ground 8 months later, and I lost everything except for Elvis and my truck. So all my books, all my writing, everything I had accumulated up until then. So I was just wanted to run away and just, be by myself. But the opportunity that presented itself was to learn that, the lie of the West is that anyone does it alone. You can't, and you need community and help. And so I learned that, I had a neighbor who would come and plow my driveway, and I had other neighbors I could call, if I needed, like, say, I didn't have snowshoes to get out or something like that. So I learned, so the challenges presented themselves, and then I got to learn a new way of doing things. Like, I didn't really need to be so tough and so isolated. And so I think that was terrific. I mean, I know that people look at the way I lived or read about the way I lived and say, I could never do that. But it was like an extended quest, honestly. And it was, parts of it were hard, but in those hard parts, you really find what you're made of. And you also find a deep kind of solitude and space. And I think all of that goes toward kind of getting to know yourself better.
Isn't that the truth? Because, I mean, when you're out there and it's just you in the wilderness, and Elvis, it's all dependent on you on how things run.
It is. And it's also, you don't get distracted, by whatever sounds outside. I can go to the movies today, or I can go to the coffee house, or I'm going to run, because you don't zip down the mountain. I lived about 45 minutes from Boulder, and by car, in okay, in the summertime 25 minutes, but in the wintertime about 45 minutes. And you don't, when you live that high or that remotely, you don't go to town every day. And so it would be, like I would do a big kind of run to town, and I would spend all day, going to the grocery store. And back then it was the video store and the liquor store and whatever else I needed to do in town before I came up. And that would be my whole day, so that I could spend 3 or 4 days, not leaving the mountain. So I think that learning to be still and slow down and not follow every shiny thing that goes by is really important. And I think it's something that we're losing the ability to do because we carry these phones around with us, and because we're so connected. And I think the peril of the modern age is that our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah, without a doubt. Well, it's interesting when you talk about the fire and losing everything. There's the flip side to that, because that's so tragic, but there was a lot that you developed from that as well.
I think it was a pivotal moment. It's one of those things where, only the person who experiences the tragedy, I think, can look over their shoulder and say, oh, that's what happened, see what the lesson is. But eventually it does come, or the thing that you're going to glean from it, the thing you learn about yourself, or whatever, however it changes the course of your life. And really, I was on this trajectory to spend the rest of my life alone, and to kind of, and I think the fire forced me to really come in contact with people and to learn about community. So the first thing that happens after my house burns down is that the mountain town of Jamestown, Colorado, which is a town of 300, and I worked at the one business in town, which is the Mercantile Cafe. I cooked there. And I kind of kept the townspeople at a distance. And I had been around town. At one point, I actually lived in a house in town before I went away to graduate school. And so I knew people. I knew who they were. They kind of knew who I was. And but I don't know, I just kept my distance. And maybe I even thought I was better than them or something. It wasn't, just thought, oh, I'm not like these people. And the first thing that happens is that they throw a benefit, and they raise thousands of dollars for me. And so people that I don't know, people that I don't like, who I know don't like me, show up at this benefit, and they all participate in helping me get back on my feet. And had I been living in, say, even in a town like Boulder, that would have never happened. And I don't know where I'd be today. But they helped me get back on my feet, not only through the, kind of generosity of this benefit, but also people were giving me, money on my boss at the Merc, with whom I had a very cantankerous relationship, put out a jar with my name on it, and people could just come in and put money into it. And I would come in every few days and grab the money out of the jar because I had nothing, so to buy things and to get food and things like that. And, so this taught me about community. Community isn't a bunch of like-minded people, sitting in a circle, holding hands, singing Kumbaya. Community is a relationship. And that relationship has room for all kinds of people with opinions and contradictions. And I'm not saying that it's not necessarily easy. And but what happens is that the relationship is more important than the individual. And so that when somebody in that community needs help, everybody pitches in. And I was astonished by that. I'd never experienced that kind of generosity in my life. And it's something that now, when I say that one of the things I'm interested in is building community, so whether it's at the university or whether it's, continuing in whatever community I'm living in the mountains, it's about really trying to hold close those kinds of relationships and get other people to see that they're valuable.
So is that some of the main parts that have really changed for you over the years, is just that vision of community? And, as you're talking about Jamestown, there are people who, they might not like you, but they still show up to support.
Right. So, some of the things that have changed, that this idea of community, that it's so important, and that I don't need to be out there like the Marlboro Man on the horizon, doing it alone. And I also really have come to realize that I don't need to prove how tough I am anymore. I mean, the process of those 10 years was really kind of coming to realize that real strength lies, not in resistance and toughness and hardness, but really in softness. And this idea of the willingness to go unguarded into a new day, that is real strength. The willingness to have an open heart, the willingness to be curious, the willingness to get up and try again. That's for me strength. And so it doesn't have to do with this kind of I think I had a very macho kind of idea of what strength was, and I think I've really kind of let that go.
Well, it's interesting because you can develop your own feelings around that, because a lot of that stuff we take from our childhood, thinking this is what it should look like. And hey, you went, you conquered, you did that, and now you get to restructure it in a way that works for you.
Right, and I say what happens at the end of the book is that I actually after Elvis dies, he lived for 15 and a half years. And he had the most extraordinary send off, I think, of any dog that who has ever gone. But after he died, 4 months later, I met and fell in love with a man, and I was very interested to write about this in the book and try to walk this line of, I had never really dated in my whole life. I was pretty alone all my life, and I didn't think of myself as a dater, and I really didn't think of myself as a paired up person. And I met this guy, and I think part of it was because of Elvis, and who had kind of opened the doors to unconditional love for me. And also, I think I wanted to say that, it's not, Greg's not my reward for having lived this life. It's not like a fairy tale. Like Karen goes to live on the mountain, and in the end, she's rewarded with a good man. I was so worried about writing that in the book, but I think I found a balance of, realizing that the next part of my life is to learn how to share my life with somebody. I know what it's like to be alone, and I know I can be alone, but I want to also know what it's like to really be in partnership. And so I actually just got married in May. We eloped. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And we bought a mountain house. We have another mountain house, which is not in Jamestown. It's or near where I was living, because we've been priced out of that market, but further south from there. But it's beautiful, and it's a nicer house than I ever imagined I'd live in, and it's very modest, but compared to, of course, the little 500 square foot cabin that was like a leaky bucket in the winter time, with the wind blowing in through the cracks. It's spectacular. So, so I've really learned. I think the things that changed is that I really, community is important, partnership is important. Trying to face the world, particularly now, with an open heart is important to me. And keep and making sure that I'm writing every single day.
Well, and I think another thing is being that role model, because we have so few women role models that are in the wild. It's being that role model that other women can go ahead and blaze their own trail and be in the wild, and it's 100% okay.
I would be so beyond pleased if my story inspired other women to kind of go it alone. I mean, that would be, I think that's the best possible thing that could happen, is that women say, oh, I've always wanted to do that. Because, that's what I was hungry for. I mean, I really was looking for women, and I think we need them. We need more. There's so much room for so many more of us out there in the world.
Well, you have this very interesting chapter on T.S. Eliot, so... And I think it's important that and the readers, when they pick up your book, Rough Beauty, they'll understand. But when we look at the role models available for women, there just aren't that many. And so I really applaud you for being a voice out there for women to blaze their own trail.
Well, thank you. It's so funny about T.S. Eliot because, they are out there. We're just not talking about them, or maybe their stories aren't being told enough in print, or whatever, in movies. I mean, we still have the bias in in film, and particularly the Hollywood film, is that men lead great adventurous lives and women do small quotidian things, and the roles for women are, to be the sidekick or the love interest, or, there's the Bechdel test, right? So two women in a movie who have names, who speak to each other about something other than men, right? And and I teach film classes, so I teach this to my students, and we talk about these kinds of really deep biases we have in our culture, and what happens is that the story gets told a certain way over and over and over and over again, and we believe it's true. And so we have to start changing the way we're telling that story and who's telling that story, because there are women out there, and I know, like, there are thousands of women who are living the kind of life that I did. We're just not talking about them. We're not seeing them. We're not hearing about them. And so I hope we're on a wave of changing that.
No, I think your book really opens the discussion for that, so that we can have more dialogue in regards to women being trailblazers and being adventurous and, out there doing their own thing. Oh my goodness, Karen. I mean, we can talk for hours. I really loved your book. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, that's a great question, and I love hearing from readers. And so I have a website, KarenAuvinen.com, and so you can read more about the book and about me there. Also, there's a way to message me there. But then also, I'm on Twitter at Karen Jamestown, and I'm also on Instagram, and my Instagram handle is A Woman's Places in the Wild.
Oh, I love that.
And I also I write a blog called Rougher Beauty, which is about seasonal living. So it's been difficult to keep up with it a bit through the book tour, but I try to hit it at least once or twice a month with kind of what's happening basically outside my window and how it seems to resonate with my life. And so people might find that interesting too.
Oh, I am sure. Well, Karen, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you. It was really great to talk to you.
Well, Karen, what a privilege it's been to spend this time with you, to talk about your experiences, and of course your book, Rough Beauty. Rough Beauty is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it for you. Well, on that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
There are nearly 2 million Americans living with amputation. Many live right here in San Antonio. Becoming an amputee can be scary, frustrating, isolating, but there's no reason to feel alone. The San Antonio Amputee Foundation is here to help support you and guide you toward resources such as home and car modifications and even prosthetic limbs. For more information or to make a donation, visit saamputee.org. We'll help you live a full, active life, one step at a time. San Antonio Amputee Foundation, healing limbs, hearts, and souls.
If not me, then who? This ethos is driving the Travis Manion Foundation to empower veterans and families of fallen heroes to develop character in future generations. In 2007, Marine First Lieutenant Travis Manion was killed in Iraq while saving his wounded teammates. Travis's legacy lives on in the 5 words he spoke before leaving for his final deployment. If not me, then who? Guided by this mantra, veterans continue their service, developing strong relationships in the community, and thrive in their post-military lives. Visit TravisManion.org and ensure the character of our nation's heroes lives on in the next generation. If not me, then who?
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our next special guest, Jeanne Mackin, and she's here to share with us her new book, The Last Collection. Now, Jeanne is the author of several historical novels, including The Beautiful American. She taught creative writing at Goddard College and has given numerous workshops. She lives with her husband in upstate New York. So let's welcome to the show, Jeanne Mackin.
Thank you. So happy to be here.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here. I mean, my goodness, you're such an accomplished writer, and to have this new book out, I mean, how exciting is that?
It's been pretty exciting this week, so yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Well, and so what inspired you to write The Last Collection?
Well, I write historical fiction, and recently I've been writing closer to home, which is to say the 20th century, as opposed to the 12th or the 18th century. And I like writing about very strong women who overcome some of the traditional difficulties, such as, working in men's work, finding a place of their own that is beyond the domestic. And the couture industry fascinates me. I mean, for one thing, it's so far removed from my own realm. I'm running around in t-shirts and blue jeans, and I wanted to examine what that clothing and that high standard of clothing meant to women, and also the lives of Elsa Scopiarelli, the designer, and Coco Chanel, who was her arch rival, both of them absolutely fascinating women, and in this incredibly tense time in Paris right before World War II.
Well, that is absolutely fascinating. When we look at just the relationship between the two of them, do you know what started them off as rivals?
Well, Coco Chanel was already established as probably the premier designer in the world. Was a few years older than Elsa Scopiarelli when Elsa went to Paris and started her own salon. And so there was this sense of the somewhat older woman being threatened by the younger woman coming into her territory, and also the fact that they stood for such different things. And because Elsa's designs were playful, Coco was elegant and practical, and, they differed politically and philosophically. And I also think personally, they just kind of rubbed each other the wrong way. Supposedly, the first meeting the two women had was when Elsa Scopiarelli moved to Paris and she wanted to get to know the movers and shakers. She had a big dinner party at her house, and she had just upholstered her dining room chairs in this cheap white plastic. And they looked beautiful. Coco Chanel was there, but unfortunately it was a very hot evening. And when the people got up from the dinner table, the white plastic had melted into their clothing. So everyone stood up and had the imprint of their buttocks on their clothing.
No.
And Coco, I don't think, had a really great sense of humor. And I don't think she ever forgave Elsa Scopiarelli for that. So they kind of got off on the wrong foot right there.
Oh my goodness. What a story. And it's interesting how little things like that can make such a big difference.
Oh, sure.
How long did it take you to do the research for this book?
I spent about 4 years writing it, and I did research on and off all during the actual work on the book. Usually I take 2 or 3 months to do my foundation reading, kind of general biographies and histories, and then I keep digging deeper into more memoirs, more biographies as I'm writing. So the research was probably a 3 or 4 year process as I was writing. I love research. I am such a book person. You
Oh,
can't
well.
get me out of a library once I'm in there.
Well, you can tell your love for the library and some very interesting tidbits that you found out that I think probably history has wanted to hide. When we look at maybe Coco Chanel's kind of relationship with the Germans,
Correct. Very, very complicated scenario there. Coco Chanel had a German lover during the War von Dinklage, who was very high up in the military, and she spent most of the war in the Ritz Hotel in Paris, which is where the German officers were billeted. So she had considerable contact with them, and there has been speculation that she was a spy for the Germans. On the other hand, she was also very good friends with Winston Churchill. So there's no evidence to say that she wasn't passing information to the English, or maybe to both sides or to neither sides. The documentation ultimately can't say one way or the other. I know that one book came out really, really strongly declaring that she had spied for the Germans. I'm not completely convinced of that. I know her politics leaned to the right. She was not a liberal. But whether or not she actually conspired with the Germans, that's a long way away from being a conservative politician.
Yes, for sure. I mean, but it is a tantalizing piece of history when you look back at that, especially during that time in history where, having an affair with a Nazi officer could be not really viewed very well.
Exactly. And the situation in France during the war with the collaborationists and the resistance and who was doing what, it was also very complicated. And France, even decades after the war, still hasn't sorted it out what was going on. As for having an affair with the Germans, so many people did. It was not uncommon. The famous French actress Arletty was tried for being a collaborator after the war because she had an affair with a German too. And her quote kind of became quite famous, which is, "My heart belongs to France, but my body is my own." And I think because of the complicated situation and what was known and not known, there were women who felt that they were still allowed a private life, even though there was a war going on. And there were women who were actively raped as well. So the sexuality in France in World War II is a very, very complicated affair.
Yeah, it sounds very difficult. When you did your research in regards to Elsa, was there anything that surprised you that you discovered?
What an incredible imagination she had, even as a child. In her autobiography, Shocking Life, which is, of course, a pun on her famous color, shocking pink, she writes about how as a child, brought up in a religious Roman Catholic family in Rome, she once threw all of her mother's very expensive clothes out the window to give to the poor, just like Catherine of Siena did. She jumped into a vat of quicklime thinking it was water and that she could walk on it. She ran off with a Polish count who turned out to be a fake. She, had a hypnotism act on the stage in New York City before she went to Paris. I mean, she was a real live wire. She, I wish I could have known her. I bet she was a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. And when she started working her collections, she worked really hard too. Her daughter, Gogo, born when Elsa was living in New York, developed polio as a toddler. And on top of being a single mother and a working mother establishing her career, she had to deal with this very ill child as well. And somehow she did it. I mean, she put Gogo into special hospitals and schools for children in Switzerland. She would manage her business in Paris and London, go to Switzerland for a weekend operation on her daughter, be back to design the next collection. I mean, her first few years in the industry must have been absolutely hectic and frightening for her. And the fact that she came out so well, I admire her tremendously.
No, without a doubt. I mean, what an icon in many ways, you know?
In many ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the last collection, fashion is very much a form of political resistance. Can you share a little bit about what that looks like?
Well, in Paris, during the war, what it looked like was out-and-out rebellion on the part of the French women, because there were, of course, strict clothing rations during the war, just like there were food rations, and skirts could only have so many, yards of fabric in them. Hats had to have only so many feathers. I mean, there were real sumptuary laws of what could be worn and could not be worn. And the French women, to a large extent, just completely ignored them and came up with these fabulous, fantastical attires. And some of the other design salons that were still open during the war, they would sell ridiculous things to German soldiers who thought they were high fashion. And in fact, there were hats made out of tin cans and other things like that. So, the French women kept going during the war, and they also did a lot of nose thumbing at the occupation army, and sometimes took chances with it. A few women went to camps because the rebellion was a little too blatant and obvious and out there. There was one woman at an opera performance during the occupation. A German soldier's wife sat next to her, and the French woman got up and moved. She ended up in a concentration camp for that. So when the women were, thumbing their nose and rebelling and kind of making fun of the Germans, they in their own way were fighting a different kind of war, but it was a war.
Yeah, and they really had to be careful in the way they fought that, because, it obviously was no joke doing something like that and then ending up in a concentration camp.
Correct. No joke at all.
That must have been horrific. Do you see any parallels with the climate? When we look at that and that time, that era and that time, are there any parallels that could be drawn to today's climate?
I think so. I mean, when I was researching this, women were forming resistance and marching in their pink pussy hats. I mean, clothing has always been a statement, whether we think of it as or not. I mean, hippies with the jeans and the love beads and the, clothes made out of the flag to say, make love, not war. And, clothing is such a personal item that it does reflect a lot of what we feel about ourselves and our place in the world. The pink pussy hats, by the way, are kind of almost a direct reference to a style that Elsa Scapiarelli came up with, which was called the madcap. And it was a simple knitted tube that you just pulled on your head and arranged any way you wanted, including with the possibility of two corners sticking up like little ears.
How clever is that? And it's interesting how that lends, inspiration for modern times when we're going through different political, just issues that are rising up for women, and how women really do stand using clothing also as a metaphor and a way to push back.
Sure. I mean, at the Academy Awards, when they wore all white, and at other demonstrations, they've been wearing red for Margaret Atwood's great book, The Handmaid's Tale. Other affairs women have agreed to dress in black. I mean, clothing is a statement. It really, really is.
So when you look at writing both of these characters, because when we look at historical fictions, it seems like the characters take on their own life. How was this for you? Did you find the same thing happen?
Oh, sure. What I do with my historical novels is mix invented characters, usually the narrator and some of her close friends, with actual historical characters. And that gives me a little more liberty with what I want to do, because when I'm writing historical characters, I stick as close to fact as possible. I mean, because it's fiction, I am inventing dialogue and things like that. But the life facts of that person are based on what we actually do know about her. So the narrator, Lily, is the woman that has the emotional journey from this stage of her life to the next as she lives it through the characters of Elsa Scaparelli and Coco Chanel.
What else would you like to share? We don't want to give too much away about the last collection because we want people to pick up their own copy. What else would you like to share in regards to this book?
This book for me, like my other novels, is pretty much it's a hero's journey as lived by women, but it's also a book about coming through and finding yourself again and surviving and just surviving in a way that allows as much joy as possible in your life, even during a war and after a war. It's about survival and love and healing.
Who was the most difficult character to write in the last collection?
It was definitely Coco, because there's so much about her that we don't know. She lied about her own past. She told people she was raised in a convent school, and in fact, she was raised in an orphanage, but a convent school sounded a little classier than an orphanage. Her early life is very loaded with questions of, did this really happen or did it not happen? And her politics, her right-leaning conservatism are so very different from mine. She tried to break up a union when her workers tried to unionize. And I'm a union supporter. She was difficult for me to come to terms to. But by the end of the book, I think I had a better understanding and appreciation of her and what she had to go through to get to where she was, and how damaged she had been as a child, and how she took so much of that trauma and turned it into something creative and beautiful.
That's so gorgeous. Well, and it's kind of, I can understand why people really resonate with the last collection, because I think as women, we can see ourselves in these characters in many ways. There's a lot of drama that goes on, a lot of excitement. And at the same time, there's a lot of really heartfelt, as you were talking, like trauma that they're also kind of working through.
Correct. I mean, the characters have full lives with many dimensions. They're falling in love. They're recovering from love. They're trying to escape love. They're trying to be on their own. They're trying to find someone they can lean on. I try to make them as emotionally possible as I can, because they do kind of stand in for us in some of our own struggles.
Well, you did a beautiful job pulling that all together, because I'm sure it's a challenge.
Thank you.
As you're piecing all, the history and, what you do know of Coco Chanel and pulling it all together must have been just really interesting. Well, so each woman left a legacy. When we look at Coco and Elsa, they both have their own legacy. What would those legacies be?
Coco's legacy was so very important and valuable. She more or less liberated the female body from the corsets and, the 10-pound hats that you had to hide under, and the layers and layers and layers of clothing. And she created this simple, streamlined shape for clothing that was easy to wear, comfortable to wear, and allowed women to be more athletic in their daily life, to move more freely. And that was so important. And she also created elegance. She got rid of all of the frou-frou and the feathers and the frills and the bows. And that woman looked good in simple clothes. I mean, some of her greatest inspirations were men's country tweeds from England, simple riding habits and tweed jackets. She was very influenced by those, and they still show in her collection. Elsa Scaparelli, on the other hand, because she came from a more privileged background, came from a home filled with art and music and manuscripts and books, she made fashion playful. She said, okay, fashion is serious, wardrobes are serious, but you can also have fun with it. And by the way, clothing is art as well. And she made that point. She teamed up with Salvador Dali, the surreal artist, and created some really strange clothing. But she's the one who made it possible to have fun with clothes. They didn't always have to be serious.
How beautiful that they both brought their own style in and their own flavor into clothing in such a way. I mean, we're still seeing the impacts today.
Absolutely. When I was a little girl, one of my favorite shirts was, cotton with newsprint printed on it. I had no idea that had originally been inspired by Elsa Scopiarelli. Their fashions just go on.
Mm-hmm. Well, you look at the 80s, I think that probably has LA, all over it. Oh my goodness. Well,
it's the gypsy look.
Oh yeah, for sure. What do you want readers and our listeners to take away from the last collection?
That there is a possibility for survival as long as you stay open, that women can achieve things they may not have dreamed of achieving 2 or 3 generations ago, and that we need to keep asking questions rather than looking for stereotypes. I think that's the most important thing. It's so easy to draw lines and boundaries and say yes to this person and no to that person, when in fact we need to get to know people and avoid the stereotypes as much as possible.
I couldn't agree with you more. What I took away from the book is really being able to blaze your own trail and use that creativity to express yourself in ways that are unique to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Expression is so important. No matter what your field, your occupation, your hobby, expression it expands you. It expands you, your life, your soul, your people around you. It's important.
So between the two women, if you had to choose between, which type of dress or fashion you'd wear today, which one would it be?
I have to say it would be Coco, just because I tend to be pretty shy and a wallflower, and I think her clothes were easier to wear without drawing a lot of attention. And Elsa Scopiarelli said that herself. She had, I think there were 12 rules for women to follow in fashion, and one of them was that, most women are afraid to stand out in a crowd, and so will choose the gray suit. That's a mistake. But I'm the one who would choose the gray suit. Maybe it's because I'm a writer. I want to be in my room.
I don't know. She has some very good classic styles. I probably go with Coco too, because you look at that, and it's like very elegant. You could be very feminine and at the same time look very classy.
Absolutely. But if I were ever invited to a Met Gala, I would want Scopiarelli.
Ooh, yes, that sounds perfect. Well, gosh, Jeanne, we could talk for hours on the last collection. It's such a beautifully written book. Where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community?
Well, thank you for your kind words about the book. It's a book very close to me. I have a website, and they can always contact me directly through their website, which is www.jeannemackin.com. An email they send there is forwarded to my email account, so I can always be contacted. Well,
and you have quite a few other books at your website as well. Why don't you share a few of those with us?
Well, the book before this was A Lady of Good Family, about Beatrix Farrand, who was the niece of Edith Wharton and was actually the first professional female landscape designer in the country, and a woman of great stature in the world, friends with Henry James and many other people, who still insisted on calling herself a landscape gardener rather than designer, because she thought designer was a little too highbrow. The book before that is The Beautiful American, and it's about Lee Miller, who began life as a Vogue model, extraordinarily beautiful woman, moved to Paris, was Man Ray's mistress, and somewhere along the way became bored with being merely beautiful, and herself became a photojournalist. And Lee Miller is the woman who photographed the liberation of the concentration camps at the end of the World War II. Most of the images we have from those camps, those horrific nightmare images, were made by Lee Miller. She's an absolutely fascinating woman.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. I'm going to go check out those books, and I'm sure our listeners want to pick up their copies as well. Jeanne, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much. This was fun. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeanne. It's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your latest book, The Last Collection. The Last Collection is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.